so much for coming. Really appreciate having you all here, and thanks so much to our panelists for also coming. What we've been looking at, how public art can influence the climate change debate, so to speak. We've been working with Dr. Marnie Glazier at Hartnell and her students on different sorts of concepts involved with public art performance.
Hartnell College and Millennium Charter High School students and their artist instructors are testing new ways to communicate about climate change.
And we created a Climate X piece to perform for all of you, and this piece has been performed in Salinas and New York and New Jersey also. So
the earth beneath my feet is my strength to carry on.
The earth beneath my feet welcomes me to stay and spend my days in its abounding wonders. I sense a longing and a pleading to unleash its constraints.
the earth beneath my feet connects me to my ancestors.
What about killing fields? Is there a time? What about all the things that you say were yours and mine?
And from chaos, the majestic blue marble spins into the hands of man, of me, of you,
Of me, of you.
The bands wrapped around each person here, or drawn on each person, represent the sea level at the 2 degrees Celsius mark in this exact location. This is how high the water will be, right where we're standing. That's only if we don't act now.
But we want to do something that's really exciting with the visuals, with the video that would come out of this, that would go ahead and be a template for communities in other parts of the country, along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic Coast, to go ahead and do their own climate acts. And one of the things we really want to do today is come up with real scripting language and concepts that college kids in these other communities have as a starter. Because one of the things that I think we found, Marnie and myself, is it's very hard for college students to be given this as an assignment in the fall and to come up with a very impressive performance in the spring. We want to seed the ground for them with all of the deep thinkers that are here today so that we end up with some really strong scripting.
What we're trying to do here today really gets at, I think, one of the more challenging sides of my role at the city, which is finding really engaging and inspiring ways to reach people about this topic that can be so wonky sometimes and also be very scary. So I'm really appreciative of everyone trying to kind of bring your collective imaginations and your intellect to this endeavor. And I know many of you in the room are trying to do something similar.
I hope my involvement with this can do is help the science to become more clear. In communicating the results of research, scientists often are doing so through publications that are intended typically for other scientists and are seldom made accessible to the wider public. And I think through something like performance art and expressing results of that research in a way that's more consumable, I think is an important thing. So there's no shortage of drama in what the expectations are for the effects of climate change. So that dramatic aspect of it, I think, should be helpful in performance expression of what we see. And the group has already been doing quite a bit with expressing the effects of climate change related to sea level rise. But other important aspects of what we expect to see happening regionally are, for example, intense warming increases to lethal levels in many cases, and especially inland areas of the county. So Salinas Valley, for example, exposure of farm worker populations to those high lethal temperatures with increasing frequency as time goes on. There's a lot of drying associated with that, and the drying out of watersheds is associated with the increased frequency of fire. We've seen that repeatedly now, year after year. 2018, the year just passed, set a new record in California for the intensity and area affected by wildfire. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what things to highlight here of all the horsemen of the apocalypse that are I think an important thing to be thinking about in the sense of climate change and how dramatic it is the extremes we're seeing. Rather than climate change being the only term that we can use to express what we think is coming, increasingly now there's this term that's been used, climate whiplash, that's related to the extremes that we're seeing in swinging from periods of drought and extreme drought over multiple years, consecutive years, to flooding and extreme storms like the atmospheric rivers we've been experiencing over the last month or so. These atmospheric storms, especially in landscapes that have burned before, are really devastating. They're creating huge erosion problems, lots of sedimentation occurring in the rivers, which has a really important ecological impacts. But then there's these debris flows that are associated with that. And so the kind of loss and unraveling of the landscape that can occur in these high mountain watersheds, known as mass wasting. It's basically where the soils become so saturated with water that they give way in not just as one particle at a time, but entire slopes of hillsides. As the tributaries of major rivers systems are exposed to drought, they are often exposed to drought, unsurprisingly, to the extent that they dry out completely. That has really big repercussions for the quality of water and the type of water and the availability of water that's coming downstream. Importantly, to the economy of the area and to some of our real iconic species in the form of salmon, steelhead, coho salmon, is that many of the places that they depend on for breeding are in these lagoonal estuary systems that are at the bottoms of watersheds. And so during drought conditions, when there's not very much flow, creating a good exchange between the freshwater and the tidal environment, those lagoonal estuary systems become stagnant. And because they're used as important nurseries for coho and steelhead, the kind of conditions that they're exposed to can really devastate populations. So maybe that's enough on the apocalypse right now. we can use that to inspire, but I think we need the drama to be able to inspire action.
What I think is so important in what you're doing, CHACO, in a political sense, is that most members of Congress are learning on the go. I mean, there's just so much, you're just flooded with information. It's overwhelming how much information you get every day. Just tons of stuff. I mean, we get that much in our office every day of reports. We don't even read it, we can't. So I think if you really want to teach politics to people at local, state, and federal level, what you're going to do in the sort of community arts and performance, I think will have more impact on trying to localize the effects of global warming than any kind of reports or movies or anything like that, when you can see what is happening in your own backyard and interpret that. And I think that's the question, is how do we develop those visualizations, those interpretations? But I can't emphasize how important it is to get this launched now. Then the question is, who on the ground is going to care or do something about it? And I think that's the educational process that we have to go through, is, okay, we're going to help people who really want to talk about these things on actually doing something in their local community. That chapter, that has not been written. So I do think that what you're trying to do today is a wonderful beginning, and I think a year from now, as you get close to the primaries, it's going to be on the national debate, and wondering, well, what do we really do about it? Because I think that's the challenge, is how do you personalize this? Because it's personalization that affects the way you vote, the way you talk, the way you spend money. And I think that's a challenge, is how do you take a melting piece of ice and turn it into a household word?
Is the work that we've been doing for 30 or 40 years now has helped our planet. It has continued to help our region. The fact that we have protected watersheds, the fact that we're negotiating with our water supply entities, our government entities that supply water for us. We've also shared that water with our native fish and aquatic organisms. Now, we can do more, in my opinion. We should share more with those organisms, but it is possible for us to make decisions at the local level to choose both nature and ourselves. So I'd be very curious how we explore that. And also just this concept of continuing to embrace resilience, understand how to convey it, and how to actually celebrate in our community.
Philosophically, the kind of stuff I'm working on is how do we work with our political other to agree on who the experts are on an issue? And that's what we're facing, I think, in the Central Valley. And the way I look at climate change as a threat multiplier. I'm also interested in the issue of the REACT, what I call the REACT, the relatively enlightened person who's concerned about climate change. So if you're relatively enlightened about climate change, what are your ethical responsibilities? In a nutshell, I think your responsibility is to work politically for a political solution at this point. That's what we need. And you should be devoting maybe 10 or 15%, 20% of your free time every week, not to changing light bulbs, but to working on a political solution.
It's really important to create a visceral connection. It has to be not just cognitive, but in the body. So everybody, just do this gesture for a minute, okay? Just do this gesture, get it up a little closer, and then look loving at it. Tell me what we're doing. Who is this?
Baby.
A baby. So 3 months ago, my first grandson, my first grandbaby was born, Bogey. And, I've been doing the math, and I've been thinking, okay, he's 80 in 2100. And this connection that we're talking about is now. It's present, it's here. It's our children and our grandchildren. And we have to be talking about climate change, and we have to do it in a non-self-righteous way. Because this is about our children, and it's not partisan, it's not liberal, it's not conservatives, as Paul Hartnell says, it's the human agenda. And we can't get to advancing human rights and all of the other concerns of the many, many movements out there if we destroy our planet, right? So the first thing is to recognize it's the most pivotal time in history. When people hear the science barrage, they go into apathy, they go into sort of this complicated response between denial and despair. We all know this one. Denial is, there's nothing really happening in my life. Okay, maybe oceans are rising, but it's later. Despair, and so nothing's happening. Despair is, I can't do anything. So if I go over and I take in the data, then I feel apathy and I go into despair. What I want to tell you is that what you want coming out of these climate arts events is the third way, which is commitment. Because when you make a commitment, you transcend the denial, despair loop. And you go, look, I'm down. So it's like commitment, and then the next thing is hope. Hope is more than a feeling. Hope is a choice. And every person that comes to one of your events who chooses hope and commitment out of your event, you're lifting it up. So it's the personal commitment to be the change you want for the world, and then it's also the commitment to turn that into a movement that results in cultural and political action. Paul Hawkins says, I love this, he says, if we only think that global warming is happening to us, and that, the emissions happened, and here we are now, and we're stuck, then we tend to see ourselves as victims. But if we can see, this is his quote, that global warming is happening for us, it shifts the entire frame. It's happening for us. in the sense that it's compelling us to come together. Because weapons of mass destruction and climate change have to do with the survival of the human species. Otherwise, we're headed towards extinction. And we have a choice between creating a new renaissance of the human spirit, what I call the Great Turning, or drifting into oblivion. But the thing is, it's a choice, and it's for us because it's a joyful thing. To reimagine our world, to really embrace the transformation that has to happen for us to deal with climate change, is also for us to have to solve these other problems that we're in, including racism, tribalism, women's rights, health and well-being. They're all connected. All those movements are part of one larger meta-movement. And so it's a joyful thing if you can go, yes, this is the time where we have to rise. This is the time where our children have to rise. This is the time of the Great Turning, or what do you want to call it, where we're lifted up into the space where we have to come together, and we're evolving from a tribal consciousness to an ethnocentric, kind of my race, my religion, to a biospheric or earth-based consciousness. Why? Because we have to. It's for us. We have to make that jump. And as you know from the studies on tipping points, it's 5 to 10% of the population. It takes 10% of the population to be living it, not self-righteously, but being the change where it becomes exponential. So I think it's a message of hope, science, and compassion. It's a message of it's happening not just to us, but for us, because we have to come together. And it always seems impossible. It seemed impossible that the Berlin Wall would ever come down. It seemed impossible there would be an uprising in South Africa and it become a democratic government. Albeit a flawed one still, but a democratic government rather than a race war. It seems impossible until it's done.
I would love to see us develop through the arts and through performance some explanation. For example, you were talking, what do you call this when people just get up and flash? Well, what if you went into a big mall and all of a sudden did that? People would say, what's that all about? And you know, that's where the water level's going to be.
The word hope. I have a real problem with hope. Mm-hmm. Hope. Let's prepare for the next generation. Those are empty words. They really are. And the reason is because they don't give people any kind of orientation towards opportunity. These are what you need to be telling to people. And the thing is that green infrastructure, that green technology is arguably the largest economic opportunity ever to hit humankind. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different solution technologies and thousands more that haven't been innovated yet. And these are what the young folks out there in these fields could be thinking about. These are their opportunities where they could plug in and actually make climate change and doing something that they could be involved with personally, and through that find hope.
I've been really excited to work with CHACO, and part of the reason why I've been such a willing partner is because all of my work has been focused on ecology, and all of my work within theater, as the students will attest, tends to be focused on ecology. Devised theater can work in a lot of different ways, and three basic formats are like playwright driven, where you have a playwright. Probably one of the most famous devised theater pieces is Eve Ensler's Vagina Monologues, where she went and interviewed a number of women, created this performance piece that again continues to change every year because it's devised. And again, the nature of devised theater is that it's constantly changing. It's not a finished product. We have a poetry group. We have a narrative group where we'll have people gather personal testimonies, stories. We have a factual evidence group, and then we have a movement-based group.
At this moment, we are crying out, standing at the threshold of our collective inaction, a threshold of mind, of truth, of time. The threshold poised between paralysis and movement, between my generation and generations to come, between ourselves and our undoing. At this moment, we are free to write, a story of fear and anger and despair, or of hope and hope and hope. At this moment, we are powerful, and we are called to be in alliance, to turn, to heed the universal drumbeat of awakening.
November 1 of last year, sitting in paradise by the side of the road, I felt that the paradise of my hometown of 65 years would no longer be. And November 8th, the firestorm, not a wildfire, destroyed my town. The impacts are no longer in the news, but are daily connected to my heart. My 91-year-old dad was evacuated. I'm focused on catalyzing discussions now at the intersection of crisis response and evacuation strategies, not waiting for another crisis.